for liftoff in T-minus 30.
Stand by for further instructions, Minnesota Black Robe Regiment.
Secondary guidance systems engaged.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, it will be on my mark.
All systems are a go. All systems are a go.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, you are over the target. You are authorized to fire at will.
Hey, thanks for stopping by Minnesota Black Robe Regiment. For those of you who've never been here before, I am TC. I am the host, owner, originator, founder of this channel and the show. Tonight, we are going to be having a conversation with Spike Cohen, former candidate for vice president for the Libertarian Party in 2020. We're looking forward to that. Spike's not in studio yet, waiting, well, in studio, like I have room for him in here. I don't know. But he hasn't shown up in the StreamYard studio yet, so I can't add him in. When he does get here, we'll bring him on board. So in the meantime, if you're interested and if you like my content and you want to keep me going, you have a couple of options. We've got coffee mugs, tumblers, mugs like that. Got a nice mug like this. And we also have coffee, and there is also a subscribe star now that will be having some exclusive content. Spike is in the green room. Spike, I see you. Bear with me while I do my pitch here. Before we bring Spike in, I want to tell you about my friend Laura Rear. She is a doctor and a nurse practitioner. She is practicing telemed in Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, and Montana. And she is legit. She's the real deal. But during the COOF, she had her eyes opened about how medicine was being practiced. And she's now certified in all those states, and she's trying to grow her practice. And so I just want to show you her site here real quick, if we could. If you bear with me, Laura is amazing. She has, like, for telemed, she has a great bedside manner. So reach out to her if you are in Minnesota, South Dakota, North Dakota, Wyoming, or Montana. Let her know that TC sent you. I am not getting paid for this. I'm doing this for her out of love and respect. She is a doctor and a nurse practitioner. She can write prescriptions, and she is willing to find out what's going to work for you, and she's willing to talk to you and help you. And if you're within 100 miles of where she lives in Montana, she will drive to you. She will do home visits. So once again, check out Laura, check out her content. And if you are looking for someone that does what she does, but you don't live in one of those states, reach out to her. I bet she can help you find someone. So once again, we have Spike with us tonight. I was introduced, I've known who Spike was for a while. I mean, how do you not know who Spike is? But anyway, I was introduced to Spike through Travis Bull Johnson when I had him on a few weeks ago. Brian was watching, and Travis said, "Oh, hey, that's one of Spike's right-hand guys." And I'm like, jokingly in stream, go, well, maybe he can connect me with Spike. And next thing I know, I'm exchanging text messages with Brian going, "Oh yeah, we can make that happen." I'm like, sure thing, bud. I bet you really know Spike. He does. So here we go. I don't know what to tell you. So we're going to just open this up. We're going to bring Spike in, and we're going to say, thank you, sir.
I'm happy to be on. I apologize that I look like I have a gash in my head. It's because I have a gash in my head. I was swimming today, and I hit my head in the sand when I was coming down below a wave. But I'm fine, and it's good to see you. And yes, I think that might be my favorite story of someone working with Brian to get me booked on their show, that they're like, yeah, sure, okay, fine. Yeah, I'm sure you know Spike Cohen, and then it turns out he actually is the guy who does all my bookings for shows and stuff like that. That's funny. But thanks
Well,
for
it
having me
was
on, man. I appreciate it.
no, thanks for doing this. It says a lot about you as an individual to take the time to come on my platform, which, by the way, Travis and I were conversing earlier, and he told me to make sure I reminded you about the event in Minnesota that you did for the 1776 caravan of patriots or something. You did something here in Minnesota,
Yep.
and Travis
Mhm.
Travis said that it was an amazing event, and
Yes.
he said that I was supposed to remind you of
Yes.
that. I don't know why. So he's
I'll
out
never
trying to
forget.
drum up signatures tonight.
Yes. Yeah. No, that was a great event that we went to, that we were a part of. It was it was a group of conservatives and libertarians who were speaking out against vaccine mandates and mask mandates and just for medical freedom in general. And we gave some barn burner speeches, and left a pretty good impression. My purpose for being there was to help Travis's campaign, and we walked away with a lot of people supporting Travis. So.
He's awakened people in Minnesota to the reality that, and this is why I've been encouraged about you coming on, is because you've seen my posts on Facebook now and on
Yeah.
Twitter. Um, there's this disconnect oftentimes in the reactionary conservatives, in the should we say, I've coined the phrase normicons, because it just saves me a lot of effort. So
Yes.
we've got neocons and normies, and so we've got normicons. And so here, especially in Minnesota, and really I think in the Midwest in general, people kind of look down their noses at libertarians, and they think libertarians are these whacked out anarchist, like what is it, supreme vermin, or or
Vermin
whatever.
Freedom, yeah.
Yeah. And they go, these people are nuts. They can't possibly have anything to say to traditional conservatives. And I'm over here going, as a paleo conservative, I have far more in common most of the time with even centrist libertarians than I do with a lot of Republicans these days.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is an incredibly important conversation to be having, and I really want my audience to hear these things, because I do tend to have an appeal with my channel to people who are definitely liberty-minded and conservative,
Mhm.
but don't feel represented.
Right.
And I really saw that play out in your conversation that you had with, it was kind of a round table that you did. And you had, it was Dave Smith, you, Larry Sharp, and
With Patrick Bet David. Yeah.
yeah, and that was just phenomenal. I've halfway through it the second time, and I'm still getting stuff out of it. And everything that you guys were saying are traditional paleo-conservative viewpoints.
Yeah.
For the most part. Obviously
most
there are
part,
going to
yeah,
be some
yeah.
there are going to be some differences. And so I think people need to hear this, because a lot of us feel abandoned by the Republican Party, but we're afraid to vote for libertarians or to see libertarians run as libertarians or as independents, because it feels an awful lot like, well, we're going to split the vote, and if we keep doing this, we're going to end up with leftists in control for the rest of eternity.
Well, and that's the concern, TC. And by the way, there are also people that are more leaning towards Democrats because they want to see people in government held accountable. They want, the end of corporate welfare. They have their reasons. They're against the wars. They have their reasons for being more on like the Democrat side. But their actual beliefs line up more with us. But they're afraid that if they don't vote Democrat, then the as you put it, like reactionary right wing, the nationalist, Trump people are going to take over. And so it's this endless good cop, bad cop routine that Republican politicians and Democrat politicians play, where they play good cop to their base, but more importantly, they play bad cop to the other base. Because then that way, when it's time for everyone to vote, they can show up and say, hey, listen, I know I'm not what you want. I know that I told you I do a bunch of stuff I didn't do. But if you don't vote for me, you're going to get that guy over there. that I work with every single day when it's time to raise the debt ceiling, pass corporate welfare, hand off trillions of dollars to cronies, print out a bunch of money, give it all to cronies and stick you with the bill for it, continue expanding the growth of government intrusion into your every aspect of your lives. But if you don't get me, if you don't vote for me, you're going to get that guy. And, we do have to break that cycle. And we can talk more about what libertarians need to do to be able to demonstrate legitimacy and what I'm doing to try to help with that. But the bottom line is that if we keep voting for the people who created this mess, they're just going to keep making it worse. We are rewarding the behavior of people who have made this continue to make this mess worse because they say lies to us that we like better than the lies that the other person says. And that's a bad cycle. I can tell you the reason I left the Republican Party was because I believed that the Republican Party was for smaller government,
Right.
going back to constitutional limitations, lower taxes, less regulations, having more control of government-based decisions at as local a level as possible, and leaving as many of the decisions out of government entirely and letting individual people make those decisions for themselves. And, protecting affirming people's right to keep and bear arms, all of that stuff, free speech and everything. And then at some point I realized if that's even what the Republican Party base supports, it certainly isn't what the politicians support. And I left the Republican Party over a decade ago now. And had I still been a Republican, Donald Trump would have been the final straw for me, because he really never even pretended he was going to want to reduce the debt. He once said, yes, I'm going to eliminate the national debt in my first term, which was, that was his way of saying, I'm not taking this seriously. And we saw what happened. He ran up $7.8 trillion in debt in one term.
I didn't vote for Trump in 2016. And I alienated a lot of alleged conservative friends. And, obviously, if you know anything about the history of the United States, Black Robe Regiment has a very strong Christian historicity to it in the war for American independence. And so even other Christians kind of felt alienated from me. And I, quite frankly, voted for him in 2020 because I saw the handwriting on the wall and I'm like, it's one or the other. And it was literally one of those lesser of two evil situations for me.
And that's the problem. Yeah.
And I'm not happy about it, but I was also, kind of really frustrated. And had I known more about the Libertarian Party and the direction it was headed, I really didn't come into contact with the Mises caucus until after that, where I started to go, hey, there's some people out there that are saying some things that I align with. Speaking of the election, the 2020 election, since you brought up Trump and we brought it up, my friend Pirate from Great Britain has a couple of questions. One, he goes, why should a Brit be a libertarian? And then I know that you might have a thought on this, but Joe ran, who you ran with as her vice presidential candidate. He said that she ran towards the radical left in the last election and embraced woke. Why should anyone listen to the Libertarian Party?
Yeah, so this was a problem with the Jorgensen campaign when it came to messaging. Jo Jorgensen herself.
And thank you for that, Pirate, by the way.
Yeah, and thank you for the question. Jo Jorgensen herself, as a candidate, as a person, in terms of her actual beliefs and policies, is a bottom right, economic right-wing libertarian out of the classic tradition of people like Murray Rothbard and Ludwig von Mises.
Really? So you put her in the same camp as Rothbard?
In terms of her beliefs, okay?
Okay.
The problem was Jo Jorgensen was not in charge of her messaging. Jo Jorgensen had people that she put in charge of it, and they decided to go in a completely different direction very often. But then they would try to correct and go in the other direction, and then they would offend people on this side. And so basically the messaging was all over the place because Jo didn't take charge of it, didn't want to be a part of it. It was made very clear early on in the campaign that they did not want any of my input. And because of that and some other issues I had with the actual running of the campaign, I basically took the people within that campaign that were doing good work and wanted to try to right this ship as much as possible, and other people that didn't want to be involved in the campaign but wanted to help me, and basically built my own team and ran sort of not a separate campaign, but my own team running a campaign to try to help Jo and help the campaign. And a big problem has been, like, for example, I'm sure that what he was referring to was there was a tweet that was put out shortly after we got the nomination that said something along the lines of, it's not enough to be not racist, you must be actively anti-racist. Well, if you don't know the background of that quote, it still is confusing. What does that even mean? What does actively anti-racist mean? Can I just not
Well,
be
thank you,
racist?
Ibram X. Kendi, for that, because he's the one that
What's that?
Ibram X. Kendi is the one who actually put that statement out, and a lot of people during that campaign picked that up and ran with it.
Well, so the thing is, that's actually a quote from Angela Davis, like from long ago. It's like a communist phrase. I don't think anyone in the Joe campaign knew that. They probably knew whoever it was you said that had said it and thought it sounded good and put it out there. Joe didn't know about that. And that's a problem. If you're not in control of your social media, if you're not in control of your messaging, then you're going to have a bunch of stuff put out that's going to sit on you for the rest of your life. And especially if you still don't know about it. And so that was an ongoing problem. What it comes down to is that libertarianism wasn't represented well, and that happened very often. Libertarianism isn't about picking sides in a culture war. Libertarianism is about identifying the problems that are being created by, or made worse, or created and made worse by too much power in the hands of too few people through government, and working to dismantle those structures, dismantle those programs and that power, and put it back in the hands of the people. Libertarians believe that we do best when we are most free. We believe that the problems that we are facing are almost always a result of too much power in the hands of too few people who are trying to centrally plan everything. And that's what libertarianism is about. We learned a lesson with Joe Jorgensen, and we're moving forward from that.
Do you think the average person who would maybe align themselves with the Libertarian Party as it is now, do you think they find themselves having more in common with the mentality? Because I've heard you mention this. I've heard guys like Dave Smith and Robbie Bernstein have bring this up. Tom Woods, and obviously you know who Tom Woods is. Tom Woods has brought this up, that one of the problems with a lot of people who are self-identified as libertarian is, oh, well, I take the good from the left and I take the good from the right, and I take the good Democrats and the bad, and I take all the good, and so therefore everything we do is good because we take the good from both sides. And I'm over here as a conservative going, that's literally impossible. You can't. Okay, well, maybe functionally maybe it's not impossible. It's
called being a centrist, and that's not what we're about, and that's the problem. Now, I will say this: Republicans and Democrats will often say things that we agree with, but they're often lying, or they're not going to actually follow through on it. But there are times, AOC was just out saying, why are we, taking taxpayer money and giving it to Israel? Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with that. That's that broken clock being right. I guess it happened one other time today too. So there are examples of that on the Democrat and Republican parties, but we have to stop doing this messaging of saying we're the best of both parties, or we're fiscally conservative and socially liberal. We are fiscally libertarian. It's not our money, it's yours. And we are socially libertarian. It's not our business, it's yours. We should stop defining ourselves by the Republican and Democrat parties, because A, it's not accurate. We're kind of lying to people, or at least we're not fully disclosing what we're about. We're trying to present ourselves as some kind of happy middle between these two, which we're not. And B, who's excited by that? If I show up to you and say, hey, those two parties that are 99.99% certain to win this election, I'm kind of like 20, 30% better than them. Also, I have no chance of winning. How does that excite people? People don't like Republicans and Democrats. People are getting sick of being lied to by politicians. Something like 40% of voters don't vote. How are we exciting them by going, we're kind of like them, but marginally better, but not in a scary way, but marginally better? No, we are a stark contrast from the statist nonsense that has put us in the mess we are in right now. That's them. And we are over here saying that the problem is that they've taken too much power, too much money, too much control, and too much freedom away from you. And our plan is to put it all back in your hands where it always belonged. And that's the difference between us and Republicans and Democrats. We are not centrists. We are not moderates. And we need to stop presenting ourselves within their failed paradigm.
Exactly. And I'm going to give you an example of that centrist mentality that I experienced. So Minnesota just had their the Republican Party state convention, and it's in my neck of the woods, about 30 miles from where I live. So
Okay.
I showed up and having no idea if I was going to even be able to get in. They wanted to charge us a guest fee to get in, and I was like, no. And I said, I even hinted at the idea of maybe getting in as a journalist because I have an independent media platform, and like,
Right.
where are your credentials from? And I'm like, my own. But
That's like that's like that thing with Ron Swanson. I have it right here, and it just says I can do whatever I want.
I should have borrowed that ahead of time. No,
Yes.
I wasn't thinking on my feet.
I got my credentials right here.
Yeah.
I can cover anything I want to because the First Amendment says so.
so.
Okay, all right. Well, I guess we'll let him in.
Well, touche. You may come in. One of the candidates had sent one of his representatives out, and somebody that I had interviewed for my channel before, and he's like, "Hey, you want in?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Here, you can have one of our war room passes. They'll get you anywhere in the building that you want to go."
Oh wow,
And I'm
cool.
like, "All right, cool." So I went in and I'm covering it, and a guy that I have respected got up on the platform to endorse one of the candidates for governor because Saturday was the governor endorsement. Who are we going to pick to run as the Republican candidate? And he said, I align with candidate X philosophically more than I align with this candidate. And he said it a couple times. I actually align with this candidate philosophically more than anybody else in the race, but I'm endorsing so and so because he can win.
So what's the point? And this is what happens all the time. And I get it. And I do want to talk about the fact that we do need to address the concerns people have about libertarians that we can't win. But at some point, if you are putting can this person win above do I even agree with this person, then at some point you're reaching a level of saturation where they're not substantively different than what you're fighting. You might as well vote for the Democrat. Then we can ensure that the Democrat wins because then we'll all just vote for the Democrat. Like there's a point where the so-called pragmatism has to give way to saying, no, here is our foot in the sand. Here is our line in the sand. And we are going to whatever additional difficulty it's going to take to get this candidate that actually aligns with our values, that actually presents a stark difference. If it means that it's going to be this much harder, then we got to put that much effort into it, that much more effort into it. But we cannot continue to just say, oh, well, that one's the most likely to win. Or even once they're in office, then, because then I'll hear, well, we got him in, now we got to hold him accountable. But that doesn't happen because then you're constantly playing this so-called strategic game. It's really a con. I remember when Donald Trump, I forget which of the executive orders he passed that was infringing on the Second Amendment, but let's say it was the bump stock ban. It might have been another one there were more than a few times he infringed on the Second Amendment. But he would, when he passed that, and I remember people saying, well, then that way, when the liberals try to say that he's not doing anything about gun violence or gun control, he can say, yeah, I did. Take that, liberals. Well, then why not just vote for liberals? Like if you're going to own them by just doing their entire agenda and say, I did it before you could, then what's the point of voting for something different? And that's the problem. We're watching it right now with Joe Biden. Joe Biden, first thing, I think it was the bump stock ban. Thank you. One of the first things Joe Biden comes in after talking about holding bad police officers accountable, even though it was his policies that led to what we have now. One of the first things he did was triple funding for the federal government's police militarization program to like almost $500 billion. He actually raided COVID emergency funds to make sure that the police had the newest militarized equipment after running on the opposite of that. And then I'd watch people go, well, yeah, but Trump was bad too. And if Joe Biden does that, then he can say, hey, I support the militarized police complex even more than Trump. Okay, why not just vote for Trump then? Like, this is the scam. This is the con.
Well, I remind people constantly, this liberty-minded mentality that somehow Trump was going to defend us against all these. And by the way, for some reason, if we say the word "coof" instead of COVID, I don't get flagged. So,
okay, coof.
he gave us Operation Warp Speed, which, talk about a massive overreach by the federal government to not only ensure that the vax was in place for literally millions of Americans way ahead of time, but also utilize the military to, he was going to go send it out across the state with the active duty
the
military, the
military.
standing army, the standing Marines, the standing Air Force.
Yep.
Everyone's like, he's small government. He was about liberty. I'm like, he was going to send the law military to your house to give you the jab. So, and I don't do this very often, but ladies and gentlemen, please like, comment, and share this one out, because I really do want people to hear this. This is not my first show, but it is my first episode of the Libertarian Lowdown, because I plan on having other libertarians on. And it doesn't have to be somebody as big as Spike. Maybe a Dave Smith. That would be cool. But any libertarian who's got rocks to stand on and can articulate why they believe what they believe, because, as I have been pushing for a long time now, we need to find our allies where they are and link up with them across this country, because that's the only way we're going to take our republic back. My friend Sarah, who I met through school board activism, has been referring to you as someone's husband. She won't say her name. She keeps referring to your spouse. So,
Tasha's husband, yes.
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 She is watching, and she's super excited about this. She'd probably be responsible for about 450 shares by herself.
Nice.
Tomsky, he's got all that British money. He keeps asking questions. He says, we've just been through 2 years of the most incredible overreach of government on civil liberties, and nothing changed in political powers. After that chaos, what strategies do you have to change things? Thank you, Tomsky. Anybody else want to ask a question or make a statement for Spike or me to comment on? Super chats are going to catch my attention just because they come in a different color, by the way. So make sure that you let us know. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. So that actually goes into what I wanted to talk about with strategy. The reality is, the reason for the short answer that we're going to get back to with how to actually do this, the short answer is we need to get liberty-minded people into positions of influence and positions of power and have them ensure that this never happens again. Not just by not doing it themselves, but actually dismantling plans and programs that are in place that give the government the ability to do this. All of these lockdowns happened because in 2005, George Bush authorized Anthony Fauci to create a mitigation strategy for the bird flu, which had a 90% fatality, or it has a 90% fatality rate. And so they just dusted that off when COVID came around. These are the kinds of things that need to get eliminated, dismantled, defunded, removed, just, abolished, and all of that. Now, how do we get there? Because the problem is right now, something like 30 to 40% of voters in the U.S. don't vote. They aren't. They just see it as a big scam. They don't want to be involved. And then of the people that do vote, 95% of people, when they look at libertarians, either have no idea who we are or what we're about, or they have some really our opponents have created a caricature of us, and so they believe that's what we're about, which it's not. And then the rest, even some that agree with us, don't see us as being viable, don't see us as being a viable way of fixing things, don't think we can actually win, think our ideas might be a bit of a pipe dream, whatever. They don't support us. And then even a lot of people that are actually 100% libertarian still don't support us because they just think we can't win. So how do we deal with that? Well, we have to stop playing by the game of the people that control every lever of power in this government. We have to start locally and at the cultural level. And that's actually why I started a group that I just launched called You Are the Power, because that's actually what we're going to do. If you're someone who is a libertarian, but you don't want to join the Libertarian Party, you don't want to support our candidates, you don't think it's a good use of time, okay, fine. Let's go work on stuff right now. I'm sure there's a tax increase in your area we can fight against. I'm sure there's some city council people that we can get behind, that are people running for city council. We can get into your city council, your school board, your county council, who can not only stop bad things from happening at the local level, but can actually nullify bad stuff that's happening at the state or federal level by not letting their law enforcement cooperate with it, which effectively nullifies the ability for them to be able to do it. If you only agree with us on one thing, you're not even sure you're a libertarian, but you agree with us on one or two things. Okay, great. Let's work together on those one or two things. What You Are the Power is localized, single issue activism that is built
Right.
around the idea of identifying problems that are being created or made worse by government. Uh, Obviously, the easy part is knowing what the solution is, because we're libertarians. We know the solutions to everything. It's usually just stop doing that. And then create a
Right.
strategy for actually doing activism to raise awareness in that area for it. And then find and identify candidates who will run for those offices against those people, to both to put pressure on them to do it themselves and to replace them, so that we can do that and much more. That is an actual strategy that's already working. We already have hundreds of libertarians elected across the country, even though there's been no focus, almost no focus on that from the Libertarian Party or the movement. We are always focused on these races that we have no shot of winning right now. And we're still winning hundreds of these races. This is about hyper-focusing where we are most effective. People are not going to trust libertarians in the White House or even in Congress until they can see what our ideas look like in their backyard. So we do it at the grassroots level. We get libertarians elected. We help contribute to the cultural shift away from relying on government, despite all evidence to the fact that that's a bad idea, and towards the realization that being freer also means being safer, being healthier, being more prosperous, and everything else. That's the work that we're doing.
You had said something about, like one issue. You agree with us on one issue. So
Yep.
come on over.
Yep.
Because a lot of people talk about this in a derogatory way, and it won't surprise you when I bring it up, is oh, you're a single issue voter. I'm like, everybody is to some degree. There's just really no way to avoid it. Everybody's got that one issue they won't compromise on. Well, I shouldn't say everybody. There are a lot of people in the
A lot of
Republican
people, yeah.
Party right now who will compromise on everything, as I realized on Saturday. But the reality is that just about everybody is a single issue voter. For me,
That's a lot.
so like I'm paleo. I'm a very, very small, very restricted government guy. I
Yep.
think Roe v. Wade. What am I? I'm all of a sudden I'm a German. I don't know.
Roe v. Wade.
Roe v. Wade was an
Yes.
incredibly bad decision by the Supreme Court. A very bad decision. Not strictly because I'm pro-life, but because to me, Roe v. Wade tread all over, or use the old language, trode all over states' rights. It stepped in and said, we as a federal government can tell you as a state what you will or will not do. And enshrine something into the Constitution that was never intended to be there. And so for me, I can't support a candidate who steps up and says Roe v. Wade was a great decision. I can't. Because to me, that, in my mind, that sets us up to look at something that says the Supreme Court has the power to step in and force the states to do something. It's no different than having a conversation with an old school Republican who thinks that Lincoln was a hero. Like, if you look at what Lincoln did, slavery was horrible, but it was on its way out. Lincoln was all about centralized power. And
Lincoln, the last state to have slavery was Delaware, which Lincoln allowed to keep slavery in exchange for staying in the Union. Lincoln didn't care about slavery. That was his wedge issue to now. I will say this: the states that seceded, slavery was why they seceded. So for them, it was about slavery. But for Lincoln and
Right.
the Union powers, it was not about slavery. It was about It was about, through force, making sure that no one can ever opt out of the Constitution, or opt out of being in the U.S. part of the U.S. government once you've entered it, and
Right.
that and using whatever level of violence is necessary to be able to do that. After the Civil War ended, they were continuing to allow slavery in Texas for like a couple of years afterwards. Like that was not why they did it. That was the pretext they used, and it was certainly why the Confederate states pulled away. But it could have been anything. They could have picked any single thing and said, this is why you have to change this, and if you don't, and you decide to leave, we'll kill as many of you as we have to. And for anyone who doesn't want to fight in this war, fighting against their neighbors, we'll throw you in jail. And if you speak out against it, we'll throw you in jail. We won't even try you for anything. We'll completely violate habeas corpus. And then when the Supreme Court says that what I'm doing is wrong, I'm going to do it anyway because I'm Abraham Lincoln. Like it is amazing to watch almost reflexively, you want to talk about embracing wokeism, Republicans reflexively saying, well, we're the party of Lincoln. That's not something to be proud of.
Right.
That's not something to be proud of.
Yeah. Tomsky said I'll paraphrase it. Tomsky says you definitely avoided the Roe v. Wade question, by the way. I didn't know I was asking a question.
I want to talk about that, but
I was
when
making
someone brings up Lincoln,
an example of being litmus, that litmus test or that single issue voter.
Yep.
Everybody's a single issue voter. And it's incredibly powerful for people to wake up and realize that you are a single issue voter. Now, for you, the single issue might be the death of the economy, which has its fingers into a lot of other issues, social issues, and not just and cultural issues, and not just financial, because all of these things are interlaced. So when someone says you're a single issue, I'm like all on board with that. The problem is you have to find the people who are going to work to fix that. Yeah. And there's really no one on the left, and I'm painting with a broad brush, but right now the left is moving so hard and so fast, even further to the left, that I don't see anybody that's even kind of on a moderate left perspective at the time is going to have the strength to pull them back. The problem for the Republicans, even slightly right of center Republicans, is that they're willing to be pulled to the left to seem like they're willing to work with the left to try and solve problems.
Right.
While moderate-minded, true libertarians and paleo-conservatives, traditional rocks, Minnesota were referred to as rocks and cows because our governor referred to us as
rocks and cows country. Yes.
Rocks and cows country. Rocks and cows types. We're out here left alone because we're like, I don't want to compromise. I've said over and over and over on my show, when somebody talks about compromising with the Democrats, the DFL, I'm like, don't compromise with them. Don't compromise with them, because all of the stuff that they want you to compromise on is destroying our state. And they want to take.
You should not. No, go ahead, man. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I had you on to talk, so you talk.
Yeah, no, I think that you should not compromise on your principles, especially if you recognize that compromising on that is going to make things worse. Like, it's not like there's some strategy behind I'm going to compromise on this and then they'll compromise on that. It's really just you keep going their way, and then at some point you turn around and go, wait, what am I doing here? That's a problem. Now, I will say this, because we talk about the left and the Democrats or the right and Republicans, and I think we often, it becomes easy to forget, to almost kind of collectivize people and forget we're a nation of 330 million people who come from a wildly diverse set of geographical backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, and the difference between someone in Minnesota and where I am in South Carolina, for example, is essentially the difference between people in other countries, like in European countries and stuff like that. And so The point I'm making here is, for example, in Gastonia, North Carolina, there was a situation. I'm not going to tell the whole story, but the long story short is that the city there has been crapping all over the people for a long time. It finally came to a head when they shut down the only homeless shelter in the area, resulting in a few dozen homeless people dying over the past few months for absolutely no good reason. It was a privately owned homeless shelter run by a church, and
Pastor
they continue
Moses.
to give them. Pastor Moses, yes. And then at the same time, a police officer attacked a homeless veteran, claimed that his dog attacked him, when in reality, but they're also refusing to release the body cam footage. Anyway, long story short, very corrupt government, refusing to listen to the people. There's growing support for holding these people accountable. And so You Are the Power has been there helping to promote that. We have worked with libertarians, we have worked with Republicans, we have worked with Democrats, we have worked with people that aren't even really politically affiliated, they just want change in their community. We have worked with people that you want to talk about single issue, their single issue is holding bad police officers accountable and rewarding good policing and punishing bad policing. Multiple different groups of people, and we are all together on this one issue. I have no idea if this person over here that's working with me on this, if they agree with me on gun control or on healthcare or on immigration or on Roe versus what, I don't know. And in that moment, it doesn't matter, because if we can work on things one issue at a time, if we can build consensus around common sense libertarian ideas, one issue at a time, one candidate at a time, one solution at a time, then we can fix things. Instead of falling into our camps and saying, oh, well, you're one of those MAGA types, or, oh gosh, I bet you support Bernie, don't you? Instead, just saying, or I guess you support Spike Cohen, or I guess you're a libertarian type or whatever. Instead, just working together on that issue, then we can do a lot. We can accomplish a lot of things right now, and we can show people that they have more power than they ever thought they did. And if those goals that we're working on are all libertarian, we're accomplishing libertarianism instead of just talking about it. I want to talk about the Roe v. Wade thing because I'm not avoiding that. I think that
I didn't think you would.
Yeah.
I've never seen you avoid an issue. So
yeah. So I want to talk specifically about Roe v. Wade and then more broadly about abortion, because in my mind, there's a decoupling there. The way that Roe v. Wade was decided was atrocious. The idea that this decision ended up being made at the Supreme Court at the federal level, it was always doomed to fail. And that was done poorly. I think what's going to likely end up happening now, if the draft decision ends up actually becoming the official position, and Roe v. Wade is no longer the law of the land, or the order of the land, then what's likely to happen is that you're going to have some states that have severe restrictions on abortions, and then you'll have some states that have some restrictions on abortions. You'll have other states that have little to no restrictions on abortions. You'll have some states that ban any taxpayer money being used for it, which is the right position. You'll have other ones that have full free abortions for everyone, and you'll have things all in between. And what that will allow is it will allow the federalist model of 50 state laboratories, where we can look and see, okay, what is actually leading to what we want. Broadly speaking, when it comes to abortion, not just Roe v. Wade or policy, but broadly speaking, when it comes to abortion, I consider myself pro-life. I think that abortion is a gruesome and regrettable thing. I think that it is. I have met people who have regretted their abortions. I think that the pro-life side in describing what an abortion actually is more intellectually honest than what the pro-life side tries to present it as sort of this scraping away of cells. Maybe not at like an embryo or the Plan B pill or whatever, but I mean, an abortion of even a few week old fetus is more accurately described by people on the pro-life side than people on the pro-choice side. Here is why I don't want government to be involved in this. Had Roe v. Wade not been in place, or had we been in a state that had restrictions on abortion during the time that I was being conceived and born, I wouldn't be here. And here's why that is. The only way that long term the abortion bans are going to stand up in court is going to be if they eventually decide that the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause covers the unborn. And because there's not going to be a way to arbitrarily decide that, when that personhood starts, it's likely they're going to pick the easiest time to do it, which is at conception. Well, forgetting in vitro fertilization, that's out the window now. So anyone who's been born from in vitro fertilization, that's not going to happen anymore, because in vitro fertilization requires the creation of sometimes dozens of additional embryos, the vast majority of which don't get used. That would be considered mass murder. But even in a situation before in vitro, because I was before the days of in vitro, my mother had like 7 or 8 failed pregnancies before she had me. Long before she would have ever gotten to a pregnancy number 8 or 9, whichever one I was, the authorities would have come in and said, listen, you keep creating constitutionally protected people knowing full well that they are likely to die. You're not going to get to do that anymore. But then you go even further from that. In order to be able to do this, what does government do when they have to protect us? They have to license it. They have to have permits. They have to have regulations in place. So now you're, not only are you now paying for a government permission to get pregnant and have a pregnancy, not only does your BMI have to be okay and your cholesterol have to be okay, which of course means that big agriculture and big pharma are now going to be lobbying government to say, oh no, they got to be taking our drug. They need to be eating more of this. You need to be more involved. You're creating a new industrial complex around this newly regulated thing. What's going to end up happening is the cost of the actual pregnancy is going to go through the roof. Abortion is still going to exist. It's not going to go away. It's now just going to be illegal. So now you're going to have situations where a poor mother, single mother or even a married mother, gets pregnant, cannot afford the cost of having a legal pregnancy, and where previously she would have just had the baby and figured it out, now because she doesn't want to get in trouble for having an illegal pregnancy, she goes and has an illegal abortion because it's a lot easier to hide an illegal abortion than an illegal pregnancy and a human being that will exist, for many, many years afterwards that happened illegally that she'll get in trouble for. Government makes things worse. The war on drugs created more drugs and empowered cartels and destroyed people's lives. The war on terror has created more terrorism. You have the government sponsoring terror groups. It's destroyed countless lives here and around the globe, made us less free as a result. The war on poverty has created more poverty, has deepened, created permanent generational poverty, has created an entire industry built around preying on poor people because of the war on poverty. Intentionally, I don't want a war on abortion. I don't think it's going to end the way that people think it is. It doesn't. It only stands to reason. Harry Brown, who was our 1996 and 2000 presidential candidate, he was asked back in the 90s. This was before the war on terror, and that wasn't included in this quote. But they asked him about his position on abortion, and he said, "I am strongly against abortion, which is why I don't want the government banning it." If you look at their war on, they didn't have a war on terror at the time, but if you look at their war on poverty and their war on drugs, if you have a war on abortion, within 5 years, men will be having abortions. Like, I don't think that's the
anytime
way to go.
The government
be looking.
Anytime the state declares war on something, you're going to get more of it.
It gets worse.
Yes. I have to interrupt you. I want you to keep your thought. I want you to keep that thought process where you're going with that. And I know we could be at this for a while, but I have somebody here who I know you can see. It's really nice.
Here we go.
It's really nice when we can add somebody like Travis in, because I'm not the ugliest guy in the room anymore.
Oh, that's debatable.
No, it's not. Not at all. So.
Well, now on your show, it's not anyway.
I love you, Trav.
Hey, Travis. Good to see you, man.
Hey,
I wanted Travis to come in and say hi because he is. I finally heard one of his spots on your show. So.
Yeah, man. Good to see you.
Well, thanks for that, guys. We're out here getting our petitions done. So we've got till the 1st to grab 1,000 signatures. So we're just out here humping and pumping.
Awesome, man. Get to work. I'm proud of you. I'm proud to see everything you're doing. Congratulations on the Libertarian Party endorsement. That's awesome. I love that you're creating this. You're running as an independent. You're getting support from Republicans. You're getting support from Libertarians. You're getting support from Democrats. You're doing the work that needs to be done to be able to win your race. I'm proud of you, man.
Which district are you running in, Bill?
Minnesota's 7th district. And I don't know if you've heard yet, but we've actually already been invited to the debate.
Awesome. That is awesome. This is your opportunity to present that stark contrast between the same old status quo and Bull Johnson. I love it. I absolutely love it, man. That's awesome.
Bull, I'm looking forward to having you on for another update about how your campaign is running. You happen to have you have an interesting scenario working out in the 7th district right now. One, I'm digging into some corruption within the potential of corruption within the 7th district. You know that. You've heard me talk about it. But along with that, you have Nathan Miller challenging Jordan up there right now. And
that's, you have Edwin challenging and you have Dave Hughes challenging.
Right, because people are fed up with the status quo up there. And so I'm thinking, it looks like I'm going to have Nathan on tomorrow. What I'd like to do is I'd like to connect you and Nathan before the primary and have you guys.
Actually, Nathan actually let us do our signatures at his event the other night.
That's amazing. That's
awesome.
I would love to have you guys on together to talk about what we're going to do to take Jordan down.
Let me know, man. I appreciate it.
So, because there again, it was funny when I reached out to you the first time. I said, "Hey, why don't you come on?" I'm like, I don't know if you know who I am, and you're like, "Oh, I've been watching you," which was a little creepy, by the way. I like it. It's a good creepy. So. I wanted to, with Spike here, I wanted to tell you thanks for making this connection because I really am. And Travis, you know this. I am 100% serious about us reaching across to people that we have a lot of questions about.
Yep.
but we seem to have a lot of things in common with, and saying, look, let's get this work done.
Well,
We
again,
need to,
we both have the same destination in mind.
right.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
Absolutely.
Man. Absolutely. Great work, man. I'm proud of you.
You go get your signatures, and if there's
Yeah,
anything
go
I
get
can do to
signatures.
help you, if there's anything I can do to help you with that between now and the 1st, you let me know.
We'll do it.
Besides driving, because I cannot afford to drive all the way to your district.
Well, look, we're in Alex at a bike show the next 2 days. I'm hoping to have a big day for that. So
Nice.
No, you let me
Awesome,
know
man.
when I can help you. All right.
we'll do it. Thanks, sir. Have a good one.
You get out of here.
Yeah, man. Good to see you. It's good to talk to you. So I was Travis took me when I was there. I was there for about I was there for I think 3 days total, and he took me just to put in. I mean, you live in the 7th district, right? Or no, you don't.
I
live in the
actually don't. I live in the 1st district, so I am literally all the way removed. I'm in the southeast
Oh, okay.
section of the state of Minnesota, and he is
Okay.
way up in the north, basically
But you know the layout of the district, okay?
Yeah.
So we started in is it East Fargo? It's called something Fargo, but it's on the Minnesota side.
Grand Forks, East Fargo area. Yeah, it's all part of that.
Maybe I just called it East Fargo because we flew into Fargo and then we went. So yeah, I think it was
So
Grand
Grand
Forks.
Forks is directly across the Red River from, and we've just we lost all of the viewers right now. They're what are they talking about?
No. This is a good. Stay tuned because so we tune in or we fly in. Every day we would do an event, drive for an hour or two, do another event, drive for an hour or two, do another event, and just did this for like 3 days straight.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Wow, this is such a big district. I can't believe we had to do all this to be able to cover the whole district." And he's like, "We covered this much of the district. There's, we covered maybe, 20% of the district. That is a huge, huge district there."
And that's the whole state of Minnesota is spread out that way. It's really it's almost pinwheeled if you look at it. I can't imagine that anybody would ever suspect gerrymandering, but
no, gosh, no.
No, that would never happen. Somebody said hello here. Liberty says hello. I'm trying to.
Hello,
I think she was
Liberty.
talking to Travis and to you. But Tomsky keeps super. All right, people. Tomsky might be English, but that doesn't mean he's independently wealthy. So if you want to say things or ask a question, you can't just put it all on Tomsky. Some of you Americans have some money. Come on,
Yes.
Don't put it all on Tomsky.
We're funding this show 10 British pounds at a time.
Yes, we, which translates to like 20 American dollars, I think, at this point.
Yeah, no, it's like 20. Yeah, it's like $20 at a time.
Until Susan takes her cut, and then
Yes, that's true.
Tomsky says Roe v. Wade was bad law. Agreed to Lincoln and libertarianism. Would you have let the states keep slaves because they had state rights? How do you counter that argument in this hypersensitive world?
You don't need to do that. The entire way that slavery was able to be enforced was because the federal government had something called the Fugitive Slave Acts, which said that if a slave escaped from their owner, their captor, if they were able to escape and make it to another state, they would still get sent. If they got caught, not only if they got caught would they have to be sent back, but they had to be caught. So you had non-slavery states that were being forced by federal law to have slave patrols looking for runaway slaves as far north as like New Hampshire and Vermont, looking for runaway slaves before they got out into Canada and capturing them and sending them all the way back where they would almost certainly be killed or tortured for running away as to make an example for the other slaves to not try to run away. Right. That was the bread and butter behind what kept slavery going. If instead, if it had really truly been about slavery, instead of outlawing slavery, which was not something that the federal government could have even enforced without another war, even if the states hadn't left, even if the Confederate States hadn't left, if they had simply said, we are not enforcing the Fugitive Slave Acts, we are not allowing the use of banks for any kind of interstate commerce related to slaves. If you want to have slaves, good luck just keeping it in your state. Between that and the technological advances that were happening, like the cotton mill, and the influx of Scots-Irish, mostly Scots-Irish, but European immigrants that were coming in, slavery would have ended roughly about the same time that it ended with the Civil War, or in the aftermath of the Civil War. Like, there was a way to do that without the bloodshed. It would have been the market forces forcing an end to slavery. And it wouldn't have been, oh, slavery is legal. You could even make it illegal, but saying, we're just not going to enforce this. We're not going to work for it. And the reality is, if the southern states had actually tried, if they had said, oh, well, if you're not going to enforce this, we're going to secede, they would have crumbled because they didn't have the rest of the economic infrastructure in place. So if the union is saying, okay, great, well, we're just not going to do business with you because we don't do business with slave countries, then that would have been the end of it. It would have been the death knell of this whole thing. But that's not what it was about. It wasn't about ending slavery for the Union or for Abraham Lincoln. It was for setting a precedent that if you try to leave the Union, we will kill you until you come back.
Yeah, I don't think we can emphasize that enough, because really, ultimately, what happened during the American Civil War was just that. The federal state. Most of my viewers know I very rarely refer to government the way most people do, because I have a completely different take on who the government is, because I guess I read the Constitution. But the federal state literally stepped in and said, "Oh, even though secession is guaranteed, it's not. It's not. We're just going to tell you that we have now the ability to force you to stay here and do things you don't want to do." I think this transitions well into a conversation that I've been having for quite some time with my friend Kevin, and he is watching. It's way past his bedtime, but his wife has made him stay up to watch this on their giant 72-inch television.
Oh wow! So you're getting the gash in
yeah, you're getting the full spike gash tonight.
The full spike gash. Gosh, that look. And by the way, it doesn't look nearly this bad. It's the lighting that makes it look. It's not. As soon as I go on, I'm like, bro, why do I have this giant red thing?
If I could do this in the dark, it would be a much better show. So, but now I'm like convinced, by the way, that I'm gonna have to try this through Anchor. I'm gonna have to try and stream this through Anchor and on YouTube, because I've been listening to you guys on Muddied Waters, and so yeah. So, my friend Kevin and I have been having this debate, because his ultimate idea is that, and yes, Kevin, I'm throwing you under the bus right now. Ultimately, libertarianism, as he says here, and he gets a very brief view because he didn't super chat. My problem with libertarian ideology is that at its furthest point, it's actually anarchism, as leftist is to socialism. And I have been telling him, and this is the thing, and I'll hear about this on Monday or in a private message. His thing is, well, what are you going to do about roads and bridges? And I know you've never heard that argument before.
No, gosh. Wait, roads and I never even thought about roads. Oh, crap, I'm not a libertarian anymore. Oh, no, Kevin. Why did you bring up the roads and bridges? I never thought of that. No, so here's what I would say to that.
Love you, Kevin.
When people, because it can be argued by me and others that if you take libertarianism, the idea of the non-aggression principle, the idea of self-ownership, personal autonomy, and all of that to its full logical conclusion, then that would mean, if we're saying anyone infringing on your rights, anyone robbing you, anyone taking from you against your will, anyone ordering you around is an inherent act of aggression and should not be tolerated, the logical conclusion of that would be that would also mean government as well. Here's what I have to say to this. If your idea of anarchism is a system of governance in which, even if we still have a government, it is only funded voluntarily, not by taxes, if it allows for competition for provision of services instead of assuming a monopoly over things, and allows people to opt out if they don't wish to participate in their particular idea and instead go with a free market idea, if that's your definition of anarchism, you sold me. Let's try that. What I would also say is that long before we get to that, as Travis was saying, we're going in the same direction. Actually, we're going in the opposite direction right now with an ever-growing government that's infringing on every aspect of our lives. And if you're a constitutionalist, you're an anarcho-capitalist like me, you're a minarchist from like the tradition of like Bastiat or John Locke, whatever you are, if you recognize we're going in the wrong direction and we need to turn around and go way back that way, then we're on the same side. Now, once we get here, let's say we get to a limited, constitutionally limited government, okay? And we get there and we go, you know what? Why don't we try that Articles of Confederation thing that came before the Constitution? Maybe government shouldn't have the power to tax at the federal level. Maybe they should be getting that from the states. Well, we can decide if we want to do that. Or if we say, hey, you know what? We've seen that the free market's doing great when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to infrastructure, when it comes to protection and everything else. Maybe we can allow some free market competition with government. Maybe we can have government, only fund itself voluntarily and allow for competition. Or maybe we say, hey, you know what? We're happy with this constitutionally limited government. I'm less concerned about it, even if ideologically I go to the extent of saying, hey, listen, aggression is aggression. I don't care if you had someone make you a badge first or not. Aggression is aggression. I don't care if you wrote on fancy sheets of paper first. Aggression is aggression. That's ideology and beliefs. Then there's actually doing stuff. And what matters is if we are working in the direction of maximizing freedom, then whether that turns out to, let's figure out what's feasible, because my idea might be the most philosophically sound, but maybe it won't work. Who knows? Let's try to get to at least what you want, figure out if we like that or if we want to tinker around more with it. Maybe, I don't know, allow some of the states and municipalities to make decisions for themselves and try different things. Let's try that. Let's try the messiness of freedom, of allowing different ideas to manifest and see how they turn out, as opposed to saying we are working towards just this one thing or we are working just towards anarchy. Let's work towards ending the endless growth of the superstate, scale it back to something that is at least much more tolerable than we have now, and then figure it out from there. And along the way, we can have all sorts of fun philosophical discussions. But, I was actually listening earlier to this speech from Karl Hess. He was Barry Goldwater's speechwriter during his campaign, and he ended up leaving the Republican Party and becoming a fairly well-known anarchist speaker. And he said, I'm less concerned about your beliefs than I am about your actions. If you come up to me and try to explain why, cannibalism is actually morally defensible, if the person you're taking the human you're taking the meat from is okay with it, or whatever weird hackneyed thing you say, but you never eat anyone and you never would eat anyone and you're not dangerous to anyone, you just have weird ideas, then you just have weird ideas. Conversely, you can meet someone who has the most, the sound moral underpinnings and sound philosophical foundations that line up 100% with yours, and they're like a rapist or they're a con artist or they're a murderer or something like that. So I'm more concerned about individuals, how they are and how they act, than I am about like their ideas behind something, if that makes sense.
No, it's I think it's a perfect example of the people coming into the realm of politic,
Yes.
and saying all of the right things, but then going and doing all of the wrong things.
Exactly.
It's exactly. I mean, I don't want to get into my personal story too much. Maybe sometime you and I could talk about this off air.
Sure.
Because I think you'd be interested in it, because it ties into a lot of the law enforcement stuff. And I warned Brian about that too. So I'm like, before you have Spike on, just know I'm scorched earth. So I have gone through an experience over the last couple of years where I've had my eyes opened to how, by its nature, the law enforcement world is incredibly corrupt. That doesn't mean that every single person in law enforcement is a corrupt individual.
No. And
But
the majority of people get into law enforcement for the most noble of reasons. They want to protect their community. They want to try to save lives. They're continuing a family tradition. They want to provide for their families with a stable income. Like they don't go in and say, I want to be an evil monster who's, raising revenue for the state and putting people in cages for victimless crimes. They go in for the right reasons. But it's like you said, it's the system of law enforcement.
and so what we see and how this, I don't lose my train of thought very often, but it does happen on occasion. So how we see this play out is the state gets involved in anything, and it begins to immediately transform. I think the people would say transmorgify. It becomes this grotesque
Yeah.
a representation of what people thought was the good, and they lose sight of the good, and it becomes like this end goal of we have to have this.
Yeah.
And so let's use roads. Imagine, if you would, a reality where you didn't have two different seasons, like in the northern country part of the country, where the joke is we have summer, or we have winter, and we have road construction. Imagine if the state got out of the business of building roads and said, we're not going to do that anymore.
Yeah.
And the guy owns a section of land, and he says, hey, I want to make it easier for people to get from Toad Suck Holler to Goat Shaving Hill, and I'm going to build a road, and I'm going to charge a toll. And if you don't want to use my road, you could drive around. And the market determined how that worked. So maybe he goes from charging $10 to drive this 100 mile section of road to he's charging $5 for it.
Or
How's that
putting
any
up
different?
billboard or putting up billboards for advertising revenue and doesn't have to charge you anything.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that's the issue, is that anytime, and we said this earlier, anytime the state gets involved in something, it becomes far worse. Because whether it's declaring war on poverty, or like we've declared war on illiteracy, and guess what happened? Illiteracy went way up.
Yep.
War on drugs, like we got kids hooked on Ritalin now, which translates to kids hooked on adults hooked on methamphetamines. It's just it's impossible for us to understand how anything then, once you start to do all of these things, anything that's connected to the state, whether it be law enforcement or social services or anything else like that, then becomes burdened by the state to do what the state wants, not what's good for the people, but what the state wants, which then ultimately, even with these good actors, corrupts them to start doing bad things.
Yep.
That's it. That's all it is. And which is why we ended up, and I know that for you, because I hear you talk about the restrictions during the coup and whatnot. You got good cops, you've got good social workers and health department workers going out and shutting down businesses that haven't done anything wrong.
Because it's their job.
Yeah. We got to catch up here, because now all of a sudden people are coming alive and trying to rescue Tomsky from bankruptcy.
He just came
Tomsky says, I'm just saying that England ended slavery across the entire empire at considerable cost, as it became a moral cause. And there are no slave descendants in the Middle East because they cut the balls off. That's Tomsky and his English sense of humor.
Well, no, but he's not wrong. So the transatlantic slave trade, they maximize the idea of taking slaves out of, or taking people out of Africa and using them for slaves and then breeding them there. In the Arab slave trade, which was happening right there in or near Africa, they actually went the opposite direction and were turning all of the male slaves into eunuchs, and I believe even doing or fixing or neutering the women as well, so that they couldn't breed. So that's why you don't see this massive descendants of the Arab slave trade, because they couldn't couldn't breed.
Right. Which also led to more American interventionism with the Barbary Coast.
Yes, with the Barbary Pirates.
American sending,
Yep. And then ironically, the interesting thing about it's odd that we're talking about England, but I guess when someone shells out $100 American, that's what happens. But in the UK, part of their when they were doing their, I guess their imperialism, their conquering of especially in the sub-Saharan Africa, they used as a moral justification for that, well, we're ending slavery. We're going in there and we're ending slavery, which was true. But they were also like kind of enslaving people with extra steps through the imperial process, which then led to all the corruption and the puppet governments and everything that's happened since then. But going back to what you were talking about with road. Oh, hi, Sarah. Say hello to Tasha's husbands.
I guess you guys met.
Oh, the Juggalos.
Yeah.
Yes. In Burnsville, Minnesota, at
What a memory.
Burnsville, Minnesota. I was speaking in this like almost it looked like an amphitheater at a park, and
that would be that pretty much any town in Minnesota. So
it was the craziest thing. They're like, yeah, you're speaking at a park. I'm like, okay, and I show up and it looks like we're gonna do Shakespeare in the park, and which we didn't because I don't know any Shakespeare. But yeah, and then you guys were the Juggalos. Okay, great, good, great to meet you. What a small world. But yeah, so when the Soviet Union ended, the average Russian was freaking out about how they were going to get food, because up until that point, the way you got food was you went to the government store or the government bread line or the government. You would go to government because that was how you got food, was from the government. And so they're like bread lines, and it had gotten a little bit more sophistication. Now they had things that looked like grocery stores, but they were just basically government food banks, and you could go in and get your ration for foods and so forth. But that was how it was, and you didn't pay for it because a government owned you, and so you would go and get it. And they're thinking, well, now how are we going to get fed? And when people would say, well, we have stores and you buy food, and they're like, buy food? What? Markets and private provide. What if I starve to death? Like they couldn't get it. And we look at them and we go, those fools, don't they know that the market can provide? And then we look at asphalt on the ground and say, thank God we have a government. So we are conditioned,
and bridges that fall down. So
everything would just fall apart. So we're conditioned to the idea that in this society that we have, at a time when you have companies that are coming up with the most sophisticated ways of providing you with something that you decided to impulse buy online, and they get it to you like 12 hours later so you don't change your mind. Like in this world where, we're right now for basically free, we are communicating on what 30 years ago would have required millions of dollars worth of equipment, could only be done by a handful of broadcasting companies. Now everyone with an internet connection and a semi-decent computer or phone can do this. But the idea,
and an inflated ego. So
well, yes, and self-importance. I wasn't going to say that, but yes. But I didn't say it was a bad thing. If you're self-important, that means you're important.
I'm all on board, bro.
Self-importance is importance. Okay, all importance matters. But in that society, we will then look at asphalt on the ground and think only government could possibly manage that. Well, not only does that just intuitively not make sense, but it's false. What are people constantly complaining about to government? The roads. What is government stop? I just saw there was an article. I want to say it was in LA, but it might have been somewhere else, where there was the city went in and spent a fortune. There were these crosswalks that had not been painted, and they had promised it was going to get painted, and I think they even introduced some kind of like impact fee to cover it. Years went by, they still hadn't done it. So some like group of people just went out and painted it, because all you got to do is just put white paint on it. Like you can look up how to paint a crosswalk, and they did, and they painted it. It's probably the people that work for it. And so they went and did it. So what did the city do? They pressure washed it down and scraped it down, and they're repaving parts of the road because it was done illegally.
Right.
Without government, who would rob you to take care of the roads, neglect to take care of the roads, and then spend money to undo when someone else takes care of the roads on their own? So the reality is, what do you need for roads? You need a demand. Well, we have that. You need a supply. Well, we have that. And then you need someone who's going to manage it and be able to make money from it. Well, you can have advertising on along the roads. You can sell naming rights for the roads. You can have, a toll, especially now with transponder systems. You can have tolls and everything else. And by having private actors who have a profit motive built in. They want their roads to be good because they're going to get replaced with someone else if they don't. And they're going to make
Precisely.
sure that they stretch their money as far as they can to be able to keep the cost of those roads as affordable as possible, because otherwise they don't make any money. Whereas government, they can just spend endless money and that they steal from you or that they print out, right? So
Right.
in every way, and this goes down to the core of libertarianism, not just that aggression and central planning are morally wrong, they also don't work. If I can rob you at any time I want to, if I can order you around, I don't have to actually provide you with value, because I've already demonstrated that the reason you're giving anything to me is because I'm going to make it really bad for you if you don't. Instead of offering you value in exchange for money, I'm offering you a lack of punishment in exchange for your money. And don't be surprised if that violent monopoly that I've created doesn't actually turn out to provide good services
It
to
just
the point
provides
where you don't
violence.
even expect it. What's that?
It just provides violence.
It just provides violence. I provide you with violence, orders, and everything being worse. Now, again,
And-
I'm not necessarily making an anarchist argument. I am making an argument that if we are to have a government, if we are to have a state, it needs to provide value, and the only way it can provide value is if any money it gets is voluntary
Right.
fees for services, right? So it needs to be voluntary. We need to have a voluntarily funded government, or else inherently it's going to be bad. It needs to have absolutely no control over the currency, because it can just manipulate the currency the way that it does all the time right now.
Gee, what do you
So
mean?
that,
What are you talking about? What could that possibly? I mean, how could that
oh,
possibly be the case? Like, fiat currency leads to inflation?
oh, I would never suggest that fiat currency leads to inflation. But let's just hypothetically say it does. And that not only does it lead to inflation, but it leads to them being able to control who actually has the wealth. Because, okay, let's say the wealth is distributed relatively evenly. You know, some people have a little bit more, some people have a little bit less. If I have the ability to say, okay, there's about $4 trillion in circulation, it's spread out this way, I'm going to print out 2 trillion more and hand it off to these people over here who put me in office. I have the value of the economy hasn't gone up. I've just disrupted and shifted where the value is being held, because I'm controlling the economy, right? I'm controlling the actual currency that's being used. So I've just straight up robbed you. I didn't actually take any dollars from you, but what I did was I made the value shift to that money. And the
Mhm.
closer you are to that actual money, the more wealth you just got for no reason. And because there's more money chasing the same amount of goods and services, the price of everything goes up because the value of that currency goes down. So I have just straight up robbed you through inflation in order to pay off the people who put me in office, because I can and because I have the ability to. Take government out of currency entirely. And then the other thing is, any service that government is providing, there's no reason that others can't also provide it in competition as well. So allow
I would
that.
argue that prior to the government getting involved in a lot of this stuff, the private sector handled it far better. When you look at the inception,
Always.
when you look at the inception of Social Security and the Great New Deal,
Yeah.
prior to that, the church, and by the church I'm referring to all of Christendom, the church handled
Like the
things
people,
like
yeah.
handled charity and welfare far better, and actually helped people get out of that lifestyle
Yep.
of dependency. Whereas when the state stepped in, it created a deeper level of a lifestyle of dependency. So I want to shift a little bit,
Sure.
if you would, uh, because I think that a lot of people have started to be awakened to the ideology of a blind allegiance to law enforcement in the United
Yep.
States, and
Yep.
um, one of those places has been your defense of Joshua, in Gastonia.
Yeah.
But coming there again, sometime I'll tell you my story. But you've brought up the idea of theft, taxation being theft. Something that had caused me no amount of small turmoil was a statement that I made on social media, which is taxes, fees, and assessments are nothing more than men with guns taking from you that which is yours. In fact, how did I actually say it?
Yeah.
taxes, fees, and assessment are ultimately taken through the threat of force.
Yep.
Which if those of you who haven't, go watch Monopoly on Violence. I think that's still on Prime. It's a great documentary. By the way, very much a libertarian perspective.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen it. But the reality is that when you have a state that has the ability to tell you what you owe the state for what the state is doing and to penalize you for what it's doing, you have to have a military force. And I'm not talking about an army, a navy, an air force, but you have to have a
A law
military force,
enforcement force that's
which is the
militarized. Yeah.
police state. And so somebody who I'm assuming is watching because they know you or follow you, Liberty Shamrocker, says ending qualified immunity, QI. For those of you that don't
Yep.
know, QI stands for qualified immunity. No knock raids and allowing fellow cops to call it bad actors would go a long way. I want to shift the conversation a little bit to the idea of law enforcement, the role of law enforcement, and what used to be referred to as constables and which stood for constables on patrol.
Yeah.
In the idea of what's the role of law enforcement in a libertarian majority.
Yeah. So in a libertarian society, the law is the NAP, the non-aggression principle. You don't hurt people, you don't take their stuff. Okay. So laws would be things like you can't kill people, or except in defense, obviously. You can't you can't aggress on
Murder,
someone
no
to kill them.
murder.
You
just
can't murder. You can't no murder,
yeah.
no manslaughter. You can't rape people. You can't coerce people into, force people into doing something they don't want to do. You can't defraud people. You can't rob people. You can't assault people. You can't, I mean, it's pretty. Most things fall under one of or more of those things. You can't hurt other people. You can't take from people's lives, rights, bodies, or their labor or their property against their will. You can't take from any of those things. You can't violate those things. That's what the law should be. What happens is when government says, well, you know what? Also, smoking's bad. You shouldn't do that. So no smoking. Or this drug is really bad. You shouldn't do that. So no drugs. You shouldn't do this. You shouldn't do that. When government tries to enforce what it thinks you should or shouldn't do, they're not actually getting rid of the demand for that thing. And they're not actually protecting you either. What they're doing is they're creating a market for cartels and gang members. They're saying, and this is why I say, whenever I talk about ending the war on drugs or whatever, I never say when you ban something, I say you enforce the cartel's market. Because that's really what they're doing. They are enforcing that if you want to get this thing, you got to go to the criminals, the bad guys to get it, right? And so the way that a libertarian society looks like with with law enforcement, the only thing law enforcement is doing is enforcing at that point what are the only laws, which are you can't victimize people, you can't rob people, you can't hurt people, you can't kill people, you can't violate their rights. Okay, that's what that becomes. Also, what it becomes is that they need to be held accountable. In fact, actually taking a step back, in a libertarian society, it's very possible that law enforcement would be provided all or mostly by market-based providers, by competing providers who would compete to provide the best services for security and for enforcement. Okay?
Yeah, but Spike, how do you oversee a law enforcement mentality through private security when you have to have these regulations in place to keep law enforcement from abusing people?
The same way that you would try to keep control of anyone else. If you have a system in place that rewards good action through the market and punishes bad action through the market, it actually does much better than a monopoly is right now. Like policing right now is essentially a socialized government program. It's something we would, at least in theory, like, but it's a socialized program. You don't like who's providing it? Tough. It's from the government. Maybe they'll fix it. Maybe they'll reform it. We can certainly push for them to make those reforms, but we're having to go to government and say, we want this. If instead we say, hey, these people aren't doing a good job, we're going to fire them and replace them with these people, or we're going to give these people more, jurisdiction and these people less. You are now actually using the competitive system. You're using a system of competition to allow to see who provides the best service. So the consumer becomes king. It's not going to be perfect. There is no utopia, but the alternative is a continuation of a monopoly providing that, and you kind of hope that they'll do their best at doing it. That's a big part of what's sure.
Let's talk about Gastonia for a moment, because you've
Yeah,
brought up, and because I think this is a prime example, not just what happened to Josh. As a vet, what happened to Josh makes me, I don't use this kind of language very often, piss me off. Talked about it on the other show that I co-host called Veteran Nation. We talk about vet specific issues, and we pick on other military members a lot. But we talked about Josh's situation and what they did to his service dog, Sunshine, correct?
Yeah. Yep, Sunshine, yeah.
Sunshine ended up having to be put down because of that. Who holds them accountable? Because the answer is always, well, we have to have the state in control of this, because without the state, no one's going to hold them accountable. And what I'm seeing in places like Gastonia, let's just look at Minneapolis in May of 2020, coming up on the 2-year anniversary. Nobody's there to hold them accountable. Because, as we joke about on Veteran Nation, anytime the military is asked to investigate itself, the military investigates itself, finds out that the military didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
Well, law enforcement oftentimes investigates itself and find out that it didn't do anything wrong. Yes. Gastonia is a really good example of this. It's nepotism 101. You've got an officer involved in a situation that was abuse. It was an abuse of power. It was an abuse of authority. Then is investigated by the same agency. Oh, by the way, the officer involves dad is internal affairs.
The head of internal affairs is the officer's dad who did this. So the question is, who holds them accountable? This is an inherent problem with socialization of services, because right now our only legal option in holding them accountable is to apply political pressure to politicians to ask other politicians to look into this and get something fixed, or else we're going to replace them. Now, that's what we're doing. That's what You Are the Power is doing, not just in Gastonia, but across the country, where there is a need to apply political pressure to try to accomplish libertarian goals and then replace them with people who will do it if they don't do it. That's the best we can do in this system. But imagine if, some great future, in the hopefully near future, not too distant future, instead of having to do it this way, they're just fired and replaced with someone who does it better, because they're not doing a good job providing that service anymore. Instead of having government decide, like you said, investigate themselves and found out they did nothing wrong. In this case, they didn't even bother investigating themselves. They just went, oh, that was my son. Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. We're not going to do anything about that. And we're not going to release the body cam footage and all of that. This is what happens with socialism. This is what socialization of services looks like. It looks like a violent monopoly telling you, you're going to get it this way and there's nothing you can do about it. Now, there is
and you're going to pay for it one way or another.
And you're going to pay for it. Now, there is something we can do about it. We can fight using the political process to apply pressure to try to change this. And that can have some success. Long term, it is far more efficient and makes far more sense to just let the market work these things out. If you are bad at providing your service, if you are not accountable, if you hurt people, you're going to be held accountable and you're not going to be allowed to provide that service anymore. And because it's the actual consumers making that decision instead of a policy maker or a central planner making that decision, it's more likely to happen more quickly and more responsibly. Because even if every single politician that was in a position of power was a perfectly angelic human being, incapable of corruption, and as smart and brilliant as the day is long, they would still be impossible for them to be able to decide what you and your family and your neighborhood and your community need better than you. There's just too many points of input. There's too much information for a one or a small handful of central planners to make those decisions for everyone, even if they're the smartest and most incorruptible and above reproach people that you've ever met. And those positions attract the exact opposite of those people. And that's the problem. It attracts people that are some weird combination of inept, corrupt, evil, complacent, apathetic, self-serving, because that's what those positions lead to. It leads to people who aren't really good at stuff. They're just good at lying to people to get their vote, and then finding cronies who will bankroll the whole thing.
Right.
That's the problem with socialization of services, is that we're at their control. So when people say, but without government, who would do this? My answer is, without government, who would screw this up?
Right. I want to bring something up here. My friend Kevin, who I know, he asks these things good-naturedly because his wife is probably sitting next to him because he's talked her into watching this tonight with him. He said Sunshine was hit by a car in the care of a friend of Josh is not the fault of police. My argument to that is that's patently untrue. And back me up, because you know the story a lot better than I do. That's patently untrue, because Josh was arrested and the dog, Sunshine, was in the care of someone else besides Josh.
So
which was directly a result of police misconduct.
Yeah.
So it was the fault of the police.
Yeah, it was the fault of the police. Josh didn't do anything wrong. The person who called 911 on Josh never even alleged that he committed a crime. Let's take a full step back to what led to this. If we're gonna, let's talk about the Josh thing. Joshua Rohrer was homeless at the time. Thankfully, he's not anymore. And what he would do is
he'll never be homeless again after all of this.
Oh yeah, no, he won't. But he was homeless, and he would walk around with his service dog Sunshine. And he did not panhandle. He would just walk around and say hi to people. And sometimes people, they could tell he was homeless. They'd give him money, or they'd have a conversation with him and they give him money. And if anyone gave him money or offered him money, he would take it. But he never asked people for money. And he was well known in that area. People knew Joshua. They knew he was a good guy. They knew he was a nice guy. Never was a problem to anyone. There were multiple eyewitnesses to that on this day. Someone drove by, presumably saw someone giving money to Joshua with the dog there, and called 911 and said, there's a guy out here using his dog to make people feel sorry for him, so they'll give him money, and that ain't right. Well, that also ain't a crime.
Right.
That's not illegal. It is not illegal for people to like you and like your dog and feel bad for you and give you money. In Gastonia, all that is illegal is what is called aggressive panhandling. I can even ask you for money, but if you say no, I have to leave you alone. He wasn't even asking for money. Right. What the lady who said on the phone, she did not describe a crime. So no officer should have never even come out in the first place. Now, they sent someone out because she kept calling, or she called and wouldn't get off the phone. They finally sent someone. Someone should have gone by, seen that nothing bad was going on, and left. Okay. Instead, Maurice Taylor III, son of Internal Affairs Chief Maurice Taylor Jr., he shows up. He demands an ID from Joshua. Joshua gives him his veterans VA card. Maurice Taylor tells him, I can't take this. You have to give me a state ID. That is patently false. A veterans ID has to be accepted as ID. A VA card has to be accepted as a form of ID. He refused to accept it. Joshua said, that's the only ID I had. Maurice started giving him a hard time. Multiple eyewitnesses, not just Joshua, multiple eyewitnesses attest to what I'm saying right now. And the police are refusing to release the body cam footage. He's giving Joshua a hard time. He gets in between Joshua and the dog. Joshua says, you can't do that. That's my service dog. He is correct. It is against federal law to get in between a disabled person and their service dog. That is a PTSD service dog provided by government. And so he turns around. In response to that, he turns around and tases Sunshine, who is facing away from him, just to make it clear that, he's got this under control. He can do whatever he wants.
Backed up by multiple witnesses.
Yeah, backed up by multiple witnesses, okay? Who have even shown up to city council meetings and said, this is what happened. I saw it. Release the footage. So then they take Joshua. They arrest him. Now, I've heard two different versions of this, and I'm not 100% sure which is correct. I've heard that they handed the Sunshine off to a friend, and I heard that they handed him off to a bystander. They handed her off to a bystander. Either way, Sunshine goes with someone she doesn't know
No.
and is now in their backyard, where she immediately jumps out and tries to find Joshua.
Because
Now
that's her
that
job.
happened,
That's what she lives for.
which is her job. She's a literal service animal. She's freaking out trying to find the person that, it's her life's duty to protect and take care of. And she gets hit by a car and killed. Also,
So,
we
yes,
don't
it
know
is
if there
the
was
fault of the
neurological.
police.
It was 100% the fault of the police. We also don't know. There may have been neurological damage as a result of the tasing that caused her to be more frantic or whatever it was. None of that would have happened if the police had simply not even bothered him in the first place, because he was never even alleged to have committed a crime.
Right. And so Kevin brings up, which I'm believing that he's maybe playing devil's advocate here. He says, pending litigation and charges, they don't release body cam footage before the trial, which is demonstrably untrue, because we see this play out all over the place when law enforcement releases body cam footage that apparently exonerates the officer. We use this situation that happened up here in the Twin Cities here just a couple of weeks ago with Katie Wright. Her son Dante Wright was shot and killed by law enforcement in a tragic event. Katie Wright stops on the side of a road here a couple of weeks ago, starts to shoot video, and during a high-risk felony stop from several yards away, at least 20, 30 yards away, the guy who's being arrested says, I don't want to be on camera, that gal's camera right now. The officer helps him get into the vehicle, and as he walks across the road, he says to his partner, she's getting a ticket. And it starts yelling at her for her ID and registration, driver's license and registration, before he even gets to her. She says, I don't have to give that to you. What crime have I committed? And he says, you don't give it to me right now, you're going to be arrested. And immediately takes action to use his force to detain her. And within 24 hours, video cam or body cam footage was released. And they used that as an argument to explain why what the officer did was right. Yeah. So I love you, Kevin, but you're off on this one.
And so in the state of North Carolina, the way it works is when the trial concludes, if no one has asked for the body cam footage to be released beforehand, then they release it. Which, by the way, is why they keep pushing back Joshua's misdemeanor panhandling charge, which is like a citation. It's like I think a $300 fine or something. They've been pushing it back. They're going into their second year of pushing it back because they don't want to release that footage. They don't want to release that footage. Now, in North Carolina, you can submit for it to be released ahead of time, and usually it's a rubber stamp for that to be released. Except for this one, because the DA actually showed up to fight having it released in court. Joshua and some local media filed the request to have it released in the public interest, and the DA fought to have it blocked in court. Said multiple things about the trial that were not correct. But, this was in front of a judge. It's a judge's hearing. It's not a trial. But was saying multiple things about the case that were incorrect, and then alleged that they couldn't release it because there was no public interest, even though there was a tremendous amount of public interest. And that also...
You wouldn't be responsible for any of that, would you?
Well, this was before me. I've just taken it to a completely different level. But there was already public interest. You had a local media that was literally the largest local media in the Charlotte area that was requesting it alongside Joshua. But then they also said, well, this also would harm the safety of Officer Taylor. Why? If he didn't do anything wrong, why would releasing this and the public being able to see what happened harm the safety of this guy?
Right.
So they could have absolutely released it. Instead, they fought it in court and got the judge to block the footage until the trial ends. So no, it could have been released. They could have, in fact, the reason we're pressuring the city council, we're pressuring them to call for the judge to reconsider his decision and to put pressure on the police department to do the same. Because if you've done nothing wrong, then you've got nothing to hide. So no, that's
isn't
incorrect.
that what they tell us all the time?
If you got nothing wrong, if you got nothing to hide, if you did nothing wrong, you got nothing to hide. That's what
they tell us that all the time as private
all the time
citizens. Like, why won't you tell me who you are? Why won't you give me your name? One of the things I thought was really powerful and was in one of your speeches to Gastonia. Kevin, we're going to move on from this because we could. I know Spike could get wrapped up in this for a long time. but they say this to private citizens constantly. Why not identify yourself? Because I don't have an obligation to.
Right.
I'm constitutionally protected from that.
I don't have to.
I don't have to. In fact, not only am I constitutionally protected from that, you're actually constitutionally required to not bother me about that. Let's just put it out there. And
Yeah.
I don't, you know what, Kevin, here, this is what I'll do. I'll see, because Spike's been with us now for an hour and a half, roughly. And I know that Brian said that Spike keeps late hours. So, but maybe I can do a little something in a different recording that we could do where it's just a few minutes where Spike and I can talk a little bit more about the law enforcement aspect of
Sure.
where I can maybe put it out on my Subscribe Star or something. But because I want to shift focus to international things a little bit.
Okay.
Because I think this all ties in, because Kevin, being who he is, asked another great question. When we look at the standing military of the state, the police state, which are the police, they are a standing military.
Mhm.
I don't care if you're talking about municipal cops or a sheriff's office or state police or Department of Public Safety, whatever it is across the board. I mean, now we have the DC Capitol Police. They want to give them federal powers to go ahead and
Yep.
start investigating crimes all over, because we don't have enough federal agencies, by the way.
No, we need a new one. Yeah,
we need a new one who can miss another mass shooting suspect.
Who was originally supposed to just be a security guard detail for Capitol Hill. We definitely need them investigating 330 million people.
Right. Yeah. Because, the FBI is doing a great job with people like the Buffalo shooter. Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yeah.
What's your answer to the idea of the military? Because the one thing that almost everybody agrees on is that the federal state has a responsibility to protect the United States from foreign invaders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Were the founding fathers ever in the mindset that we should have a standing army? And how would you address that as a libertarian? Maybe a slightly right of center libertarian. How would you address that today?
Because, a moderate libertarian, yes.
Whatever a moderate libertarian is, Mike. Come on, seriously. Exactly. I'm a moderate I'm moderately in love with liberty. So
yes, I like liberty. It sounds okay.
It's okay.
Yeah. So the question of the military and protection. So you kind of alluded to where I was going to initially go. The founders actually didn't want a standing army, and they didn't want what George Washington called entangling alliances, which is actually the source of most of the unsafe conditions that Americans face, is that we're in all of these alliances that have absolutely nothing to do with us or our safety or our interests. They're about politicians' interests and growing the military industrial complex, and it creates enemies who come after us. And I know that sounds insane, but that's basically what it is. And so the reason that the founders were brilliant when it came to this is they recognized that when you create a permanent government, anything, it comes up with reasons to grow because its entire existence is through the budgeting process. So, they're not going to just sit there and go, well, you know what, this year, no one invaded us. Nothing bad happened. We're pretty cool. We're good. Yeah. Keep our funding the same. You might actually, if you're having a hard time funding other stuff, you can go ahead and cut ours a little bit. We don't need it. That's not how it works, right?
Buy some baby formula instead of bullets.
Yes, exactly. And so, buy baby formula instead of bullets, or I don't know, maybe allow the companies to make baby formula and its alternatives instead of regulating it into a near monopoly. But anyway,
sorry for the sidetrack there.
Yeah, no, yes, exactly. But the problem with having a standing military is that it has to do stuff. It has to justify itself. And there is an entire complex of providers who would be more than happy to help with the justifications behind those things and to provide you with the multi-trillion-dollar weapon systems that will be able to allow you to accomplish those goals. And so that's what you have. If you look at U.S. foreign policy, if you look at the government funding this terrorist group and training this terrorist group to fight against this terrorist group that they created and funded to fight against this dictator, who they created and funded to fight against this dictator, who they created and funded to fight this, none of that makes sense if it's presented through the lens of, does this make Americans safe or not? It patently does not. It makes perfect sense if you look at it through the lens of what would maximize both the profits for the corporations that create all this stuff and the justification for having that ridiculous budget and this growing government program and growing intrusion into our lives by government to begin with. Now it makes perfect sense. Funding both the Ayatollahs and Saddam Hussein at the same time so that they engage in what essentially turned into a two-way genocide with millions of people being killed, which led to the people of both of those countries hating us forever, makes perfect sense if it's looked at within the prism of how does this justify how does this create more boogeymen for the government to have to fight against? And how does this maximize profits for the military industrial complex? The way that we make Americans safe, the way that we make everyone safer is by dismantling a system that creates disturbance. You know, we talk about who's going to stop invasion. Our government's the one doing the invading and the bombing and the drone attacks and all of this stuff. During the Obama administration, 90% of the people that were killed in military action were civilians.
Right.
And it's likely, at least Obama actually commissioned a study to find that out. It's likely that that's always the case, but we just know what happened under Obama. And this is what that looks like. So then the question becomes, well, but how do we deal with invaders? Well, first of all, the biggest fighting force moving forward is going to be hackers. Like, you're not going to be using missiles and bombs. You're going to be using viruses and spyware to destroy their infrastructure. Well, there's a huge hacking community out there that we could simply embrace and say, hey, come here. And if these people are threatening us, take down their entire system and you have immunity for your actions here. That would be one way to do it. We could even have a small standing group of volunteers who occasionally come together for training and can be called up for duty if needed. Like, there are many ways to deal with this that don't involve a multi-trillion-dollar
sounds
complex.
An awful lot like a militia.
Oh my gosh, is that the case? Does it sound like a gun behind every blade of grass? So here's another thing, and this was something Joe actually talked about during the campaign, and I was happy she did. Switzerland has been, up until this thing with Ukraine, Switzerland has been politically neutral on questions of war, even during World War II, even during World War I. They have been neutral.
Yeah, they got obliterated during World War II, didn't they? They were just overrun and destroyed.
Yeah, no, it turns out they were completely left alone. In the midst of all these bombs going off everywhere, they were almost entirely left alone. In fact, no one wanted to mess with them. Not because they're very powerful. They're actually not that powerful. They're actually a relatively small country that is in a geographically important area surrounded by much larger and more powerful countries, and they have been left alone constantly. Why? Because why the hell would you pick a fight with a heavily armed country that would rather just do business with you and get along with you? Now, imagine if you multiply that out to 330 well-armed, heavily armed people who just want to be left alone and would be happy to be your friend and to trade with you. And why would they
120 rednecks with shotguns? So,
or even 100. Red Dawn proved you don't need a lot, right?
Right. So perfect movie. Great segue.
Yeah. No. Exactly. I think that the greatest deterrence to invasion that we have is the fact that, like, what is it? 1 out of every 6 guns in existence is held by an American private citizen. Now, imagine if those rookie numbers were pumped even higher, and imagine if we had even more well-trained people who had an eye towards, I am the militia, I am the person protecting this country. Imagine how much of a deterrence that would be if you're looking at stick and carrot. The stick is, yeah, if you try to invade us or bomb us or do anything to us, you just pissed off a military fighting force that's like 50 times larger than all of the other military fighting forces combined, or several times larger. Or you could be friends with us and we trade with you and you can come visit, and we visit you and we can be friends. What moron would pick a fight with that? They haven't with Switzerland. Why would they do it with a much larger and even more powerful country?
let's talk about. So, have you read? I can't even think of the name of the book right now.
Yes, I've read it.
Yeah, more than likely you have, probably twice yesterday. So Tom Woods talks a little bit about just a little bit about the Alien and Sedition Act, and
Yes.
and I have made a comparison prior to discovering Tom and reading his stuff, but I had made a comparison to the Alien and Sedition Act to the Patriot Act and said that I feel like the
Yeah.
Patriot Act is nothing more than a modernized version of the Alien and Sedition Act.
In
Now,
many ways, yeah.
So now this, I think, ties into international affairs because for me, what this does is it makes anybody who is in the United States who has a dissonant voice out to be an enemy of the state.
Yep.
Because what the United States, what the feds like to do is they like to paint with this really broad brush anybody who doesn't toe a line, so that they can then justify an aggressive act against them.
Yep.
And so if you look at the Patriot Act, it was all this hype, and I have to admit that I've had to walk back because right after September 11th, 2001, I was like, yeah, we got to do something.
Yeah, me too.
We got to do something.
Yep.
And now I'm looking and I'm going, well, we did the wrong thing. Because what it did is not only did it launch us into a whole series of unjustified wars, it's also launched us into a whole series of unjustified conflict and wars against the American populace.
Yes.
And what I see throughout the history of the United States, going back to, let's just even say World War II, is kind of this same thing. There's this ramping up of hostilities against the American populace, segments of the American populace, and foreign entities. And when I point out to people that as we were looking at the lead up to World War II, the United States involvement in World War II preceded the bombing of Pearl Harbor. In fact, I make the argument that Pearl Harbor was actually a response to the Americans' intervention in Japanese economics. But we were also already taking actions against American citizens during that time.
Yep.
Setting it up to paint anybody out to be an enemy if they were of a particular ethnicity.
Yep. And
that was all built up. Do you see that? Am I wrong? I mean, you're over here going, yep. But do you see that now?
No, you're 100% wrong. Yes.
Thank you. It was a great show. I'll have somebody else on next time. No.
Yes.
Do you see that in this current state? I'm not even going back to January 6th, but looking at the current conflict that the United States is in, it was just announced, I think it was today, and I'm sure you're aware of this. The United States military, the United States, the feds, the state is giving the Ukraine the most advanced anti-ship weapons that are in the American arsenal right now, the Harpoon missile system.
Yep.
At the same time, somebody brought up the disinformation board. Or council or whatever it's the Truth Commission, the Ministry of Truth.
Ministry of Truth. Yeah.
Do you see a correlation between what's happening with our involvement in the Ukraine and what's happening domestically to silence dissent? Because I'm an anti-interventionist. I'm a non-aggression person. I'm like so Monroe doctrine. Even Monroe's going, hey, settle down. You're going a little overboard. Yes. Do you see a correlation between what we're doing, ramping up this conflict in the Ukraine, and belittling and besmirching anybody who is speaking out against it? And do you see that could be a risk to our liberties?
Oh, absolutely. You said it yourself. You said it yourself. Whenever, and sometimes it happens before, sometimes it happens during, but whenever an action by government is taken, there's also an additional action, I guess, a adjacent action that's being taken to silence or to depress or to besmirch or to even, in some cases, like with the Alien and Sedition acts, criminalize anyone who speaks out against that action being taken, which is a really great way to make sure that we're doing the right thing, right? If you do everything you can to stop people from criticizing it or speaking out against it, or saying maybe we should do it differently, that's a great way to provide to make sure that what's being done is as good as possible by shutting up everyone who, you know, has even the most remote critique. You look at the Patriot Act and 9/11. After 9/11 happened, it sounded like you and me were very much in the same boat. We got to do whatever we can to stop it. And those wacky libertarians and civil liberty people were saying, this thing, read it. If you read it, this thing is inevitably going to end up being used against us. And we said, oh, they'll never do that. They're just trying to stop Al-Qaeda, right? You fast forward to 2021, probably even sooner than that, but we can even go to 2021. They were using the provisions of the Patriot Act to justify federal investigations against terrorists. No, I'm sorry, not terrorists, school parents who were speaking out at school board meetings. They didn't threaten violence. They didn't try to harm anyone. They were no threat to anybody, but they were outspoken against the mask mandates and other things that were happening, that were basically orders coming from Department of Education and CDC guidelines. So basically, they were enemies of the state. They were speaking out against the actions of the local governments carrying out the wishes of state and federal government. So they used the Patriot Act against them to justify investigating them, doing enhanced investigations. In other words, violating your right to, you know, against unreasonable search and seizure, violating your right against warrantless wiretaps and things like that. They basically just said, yeah, we're going to do whatever we want to destroy these people because they're being effective, they're organizing, and they're speaking against us.
Yep.
The Patriot Act has absolutely nothing to do with Al-Qaeda. It has absolutely nothing to do with stopping terrorism. If you wanted to stop terrorism, the best way you could do that is ordering the CIA to stop sponsoring and funding and training terrorist groups. That would be a powerful first step in stopping terrorism. Okay? It has nothing to do with terrorism. It is about creating a pretext and using that pretext. And I'm going to have to end on this because we're going on a second hour now. But using that pretext to use against you, because you are the easiest prey, and predators always go after the easiest prey. This speaks to a litmus test or a filter that I put on anytime the government tries to do something. And you should do this as well, or I encourage you to do this as well. Whenever government says, because of whatever pretext, whether it's the COOF, I'm going to use that for now. Whether it's COOF, whether it's terrorism, whether it's rampant crime, whether it's a humanitarian crisis on the border, whether it's the opioid epidemic, whatever reason they use, whatever pretext they use, ignore that for now and focus on whatever the thing is they say they need to be able to do. Because eventually, possibly even as soon as they have that power, they're not going to use it for that thing. Or at least not just for that thing. They're inevitably going to use it against you. So whenever government says, I need some shiny new power, or I need a bunch more money, or I need whatever it is, I need you to not be able to do this, take away the pretext, even if you agree with the justification behind why they're doing it, and ask yourself, am I willing to allow government to have this power, this money, this control, or for me to have less rights for anything and everything? Because they will use it for everything and anything. And the less power you have, the more likely they are to use it against you, because they always pick the easiest prey. And if we use that filter, if every time they say, well, because of the COOF or because of terrorism or because of whatever the next scary thing is, we need to have this power, we need to be able to do this thing. If you ignore that pretext and say, do I want them to be able to use that for literally everything against me? The answer is probably going to be no. And that will be a great way to stop government encroachment on our lives and actually work to scale it back, because then we can go retroactively and say, well, do I want government to have this power against me that they already have? Do I want government to have this power against me that they already have? Do I want government to be robbing me for this thing that they're already doing it for? And we can say, no, we don't want those things. And that's how we can begin scaling back government. Stop looking at their pretext that they're using to lead you by your nose through using your emotions against you. Remove the pretext and just look at the power. And if you don't want them to have it, then don't let them have it.
Yeah, I think that's probably why your average grassroots rocks and cows, paleo type conservative in the country right now is looking at the Libertarian Party and having conversations with people like you, even if they're not having that conversation with a Spike or a Dave Smith or
Travis.
or Travis, they're
Travis
still talking
Johnson.
to somebody else who's a reasonable libertarian. And I say reasonable because there again, each party has its crackpots.
Yes.
They're out there going, why do we get along so well? Why do we agree?
Why do I keep agreeing with
Why
you?
do
I don't
keep
like
agreeing
this.
with you. Here's what I want to do. If you can, I know we're going to end this. I want to do my little close. I'm going to keep you in the green room and come back out and talk to you for just a second.
Okay.
Because I have an idea. So, Spike, I can't. Seriously, it says so much about you that to have the platform that you do, and I want people to check you out, by the way, because you have a show that you do through Muddied Waters of Freedom.com. You guys have a whole network. I didn't even put my streamer up there. Oh, we'll do them both at the same time. You guys have a whole network of people that you host on your platform. They talk about a lot of these issues. So that even if you're not a libertarian through and through, there's a lot of information to learn about what libertarianism is, so you can make up your own mind. I know that Spike and the others there at Muddied Waters of Freedom would really appreciate hearing from you. And they say it a lot in their shows. Reach out to us. Is there any place else that they can go to hear from you?
Yes, absolutely. It's either muddywatersofreedom.com or muddiedwatersmedia.com. They go to the same website. If you want to get involved in the activism that I was talking about, localized, single issue, grassroots activism, and actually support candidates and activists who are doing the work to make cultural changes and political changes to work to set our communities free and eventually our entire country free, then go to youarethepower.net. That is our organization that we just launched. We already have hundreds of people that are involved in it across the country. We've already been doing events as a proof of concept, like in Gastonia. We're about to take that to, if you like what we're doing in Gastonia, you like what we did in Manatee County last year, we're going to be doing that dozens, hundreds of times at a time across the country. We're setting grass fires all across the country. If you'd like to help us, come join us at youarethepower.net. And and I just appreciate this time. Thank you, man. Thank you,
We
Katie.
didn't lose Kevin. I'm surprised he's still awake, honestly. He says, thank you, 100% enjoyed, most in-depth libertarian conversation I've ever enjoyed and learned from. Hope you come back on.
Thank you, man.
I'm gonna put you out for just a second.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard it from the source here. We don't need to be afraid of our libertarian neighbors and friends. In fact, more often than not, the person you should be afraid of is the person who's telling you we need more state control. It says that we can't live without it. A lot of you know what I've been through for the last couple of years. If you're not aware of what I've been through the last couple of years, please feel free to go ahead and find me on YouTube. I have a playlist that tells my story, why so much of this is important to me, why listening to people like Spike is so important to me, because these guys are telling the truth about what's happening with state control. It's not that everybody that works for the state, it's not that everybody who puts on a uniform or puts on a badge or goes into an office or whatnot is a bad person. It's just what happens with these situations is corruption sets in. We start to just take orders. I'm just doing my job. I'm just doing what I'm told to do. And that's from the guy who assesses you for property taxes to the person who takes your application to build a deck on your house and charges us $450 just to fill out a piece of paper to tell you whether or not you have permission, or the person who you have to get a permit from to have chickens in your backyard. I mean, I live in a town where I have to get a permit and permission to have chickens. That's how overbloated and grotesque the state has become. I'm not asking everybody to be a libertarian. I'm asking everybody to be liberty minded. If the only people that represent you are solid grassroots libertarians who are, you know, moderate or conservative, then find them and support them. Find the Travis Bull Johnsons in the world. Find the others, and start to make a difference. Link arms with people. Don't be afraid to talk to the libertarian. Find out who they are. Find out what they stand for. Link arms with them, and then if you are capable of doing it, have that intellectual conversation with other people around you. That's what I say to everybody. Talk to people. Invite them into that conversation. We can make a difference. And it starts in situations like this. I cannot thank you guys enough for watching. Please share this out. I want people, especially my fans, the followers, to hear this conversation and find out what libertarianism is really about, and find out that paleocons like me can get along with libertarians because we got a lot in common. Very few differences, actually. So, until next time, take back your life, and Sic Semper Tyrannis.
We are going for liftoff in T-minus 30.
Stand by for further instructions, Minnesota Black Robe Regiment.
Secondary guidance systems engaged.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, it will be on my mark.
All systems are a go. All systems are a go.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, you are over the target. You are authorized to fire at will.